Shopping is hard, right? But I found a better way. Stitch Fix online personal styling makes it easy. I just give my stylist my size, style, and budget preferences. I order boxes when I want and how I want. No subscription required. And he sends just for me pieces, plus outfit recommendations and styling tips. I keep what works and send back the rest. It's so easy. Make style easy. Get started today at stitchfix.com/Spotify. That's stitchfix.com/Spotify.
Your burger is served. And this is our finest Pepsi Zero Sugar. Its sweet profile perfectly balances the savory notes of your burger.
That is one perfect combination. Burgers deserve Pepsi.
Failure is honestly the best influence. Like, if you're not willing to fail, if you're not willing to try new things, to troubleshoot the problems and think through what potentially could occur, and then adapt and erase what maybe wasn't worth, but adapt because it was a good thought initially, it needed to be repped and made mistakes. I think if you don't have that risk with growing, but remaining convicted about certain things, I think you'll never reach your potential.
Student of the game comes from the mindset that decrees we will be genuinely curious, constantly evolving, obsessed with the process of learning and growing. I've often operated with the mindset that the game of football is constantly evolving, and we will either grow with it or become extinct. It is our expectation that we separate from those we have passed and to catch those that are still operating above us. This podcast offers a source for those that believe in constant evolution of their knowledge, individual craft, and overall intrigue in the game of football. Hope each of you can find one tool that can help improve your off-season process as you continuously become students of the game.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs, but luckily there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku, and it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Trevor, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so like I said, man, I always like to kind of start with what got, my attention to you. And obviously working with somebody that helps. But the thing that I really respect about you that we're talking about offline is I was working on the offensive side, you're working on the defensive side, and you weren't necessarily in a coordinator role last year. But what I really respect about you is every time that we would cross paths in the office, whether I'm, coming into your office or you're coming into the offensive staff room, you were always working on your craft. You were always studying, whether that was something specific for a game plan that week. I know I would walk in, you'd be drawing the cards, the past game cards, and you and I would go back and forth. Oh, they're trying to do this on offense. And then you would kind of give your thoughts as to what you thought the offense was doing, but also how you would go about it. I know there's times when we would be on the practice field and warming up, and I would try to do this concept, and you say, well, this is how we would get our defensive reaction. And just in that year with you, man, like the intelligence, the dedication to your craft, you're a very passionate coach. Those were the things that really captured my attention. And I think the coolest thing for you in this next step that you've just taken is the job that you have taken at Colgate was all based off of Coach Fitzpatrick's seeing and playing against you, having the respect for you as a defensive coordinator going against his offense, and essentially using that in the hiring process to bring you into the mix. I think that's probably the number one compliment that we could get in this profession. So I'm excited to talk to you. Like I said, we would have this conversation, whether it was on a podcast or not, but I definitely think that the coaching world's going to benefit from hearing your thought process. So as we kind of get going, I think you have a really unique story and background, starting with your playing days in college and working up to the current job you have. Could you kind of just outline for the listeners your path and some of the brief experiences you had in each of those stops?
I found my way. I grew up in Southern California and had a great high school career with a program that taught a ton about football, but more about life and what it takes to work together and achieve great things. We lost 3 games in high school over a 4-year period. And Coach Kendall, the head coach at Vista Marietta, I owe a lot to him as a young man and his mentorship. I wasn't the best athlete, so I was looking for places to go play. And out west, there's not a lot of opportunities for non-Division I football players. And so I found my way to St. John's University, and that place attracted me because of the winning culture that Coach Clardy had instilled for 60 seasons. And I was fortunate to have him as our head coach there for my freshman year in 2012. And then he ended up retiring, and Coach Foshing took over and has obviously done a great job with that program. So I had the opportunity to play. I had the opportunity to play in a system that was very simple, very much rooted on fundamentals and the lack of multiplicity. It's funny because we'll talk about philosophy and things like that moving forward, and all the other places I've been, everybody does a lot different ways. And so I knew I wanted to coach. I started to look into the avenues of trying to get into the college coaching profession about my sophomore year. Junior year, I definitely felt like I wanted to get into it. And so I leaned on my coaches there at St. John's. I found my way into a graduate assistant position at the Concordia University, St. Paul, a Division II school in the NSIC in St. Paul, Minnesota. And from there, I was there for 2 years, like most graduate assistants are. 2 different bosses as a defensive coordinator, Coach Mack, who's now the head coach at Bethel and has had amazing things both defensively and for that program as a whole now as the head coach. And then Coach Stern was in my second year. And so after my graduate assistantship, I was looking for the next opportunity, found my way to the University of Pennsylvania out in Philadelphia, and had the opportunity to work as a quality control and kind of take a step back in what my responsibilities were. As a GA, you're doing a million things, but you're also running a room. You're coaching the corners or coaching the safeties or all together. And I was tasked with that, preparing for meetings. As a QC at the Division I level, you're the assistant to everybody. You try to assist whichever coach you have that experience in. That was the defensive backfield. So I helped Coach Benson with that, as he's the defensive coordinator and coached all the DBs that year in 2018. I left there and went to the Ithaca College, and Coach Swanstrom hired me there as the DB coach. Coach Terper, who's the current head coach, had left to go to Holy Cross, and I was able to be promoted after a year into the defensive coordinator position. We had some success there. I was there for 3 years. COVID played a factor into that, but I felt like it was time to leave after the 2022 season. We had an Elite 8 run, and Stony Brook University was looking for a safeties coach. And so decided to go down to Long Island and take a step back again, in title and responsibility, and learn from somebody else and just be a position coach. And that time there was unfortunately short, the firing of our staff, but it brought me to the University of St. Thomas last year. And so another opportunity to go to a new place and to learn from somebody else that was calling it a different way to do things. And then obviously Coach Fitzpatrick had the opportunity to hire me here this winter. So really fortunate to be here at Colgate. It's such a great place, both academically and athletically, and to be working with him specifically. Having to defend him, do that for a couple of years was not fun. And now I get to do it every day in practice. So, but fortunately not on Saturdays. So that's somebody else's problem now.
Yeah, I think that the come up and the background for you is really interesting. Like you kind of outlined, obviously you went from the GA to quality control, which is somewhat of a normal path in this, but getting to be the defensive coordinator at Ithaca and having some really, really stout defenses, which ultimately, along with the work you've done since then, got you back on the radar to become a Division I defensive coordinator. But going from, a DC to working just in a position room for the next couple years to then ultimately get to a higher ascending defensive coordinator role. I think the knowledge base, like you said, you've worked for a lot of different people. We've worked for some, obviously, even when I was at St. Thomas, like Coach K and what he does defensively. I'm sure there are elements of that you're implementing during your come up. Because I think you kind of understated from the film I saw, you're a pretty good football player at St. John's, which is another respect I have for you. But on the come up, when it comes to knowledge acquisition, I think you're very intelligent, but you're always working on your craft. During this come up in this path, what were some of the strategies or processes that you felt along the way as you're working for these different people in different roles? You had the chance to run your own room and then reset back down to coaching the position. What are some of those strategies that you've used along the way just to kind of build that knowledge base? Because I do think you're a very intelligent football coach.
I'll start with my playing career specifically. I had the opportunity to play early as a freshman and won a starting job, and then that never changed. And so I was a 4-year starter, and you think you know a lot about football when you play a lot of football. And I knew right away when I got to Concordia and I started learning from Coach Mack, just how little I knew. And you learn by trial and error and being a fly on the wall and having an open perspective. And when you have confidence in yourself, I think it's a double-edged sword to remain humble and to remain open and to be a sponge. And I think that's been a very, very important thing throughout my coaching career is like, I'm confident in my ability. I'm confident in my ability to problem solve. I feel like defensively, we're always doing that based on what you guys are doing. But to problem solve, to critically think, to troubleshoot, and to make adjustments, on the fly, to have a large capacity for football and to make those adjustments. But with that comes you're never finished product. And so through the process, like Coach Mack, same thing. He was a first year coordinator at 28 years old at Concordia St. Paul. I was in my first year coaching at 22. He was coming from some great defenses at the University of Minnesota with Coach Savell and Tracy Clays, and he was trying to implement the quarter system that they were running. And it was like, we don't have the Jimmys and Joes to do this. So, learning from his humility to be like, if we want to have a chance to win games, we got to run some different stuff. And then, every place I've been, even at Concordia, I was there for 2 years and there's 2 defensive coordinators. And then I go with Coach Benson and, he's had amazing defenses for the last 2 decades and he's done things so differently. And whether it's different front structures or different exotics on third downs or different things on a year by year basis, I learned so much in that 1 year at the University of Pennsylvania. And then 1 more year. So my first 4 years going to Ithaca College and learning from Coach Terper, who's had amazing defenses in his career as a defensive coordinator. I learned 4 different things and 4 different ways to do it. And then in year 5, I'm 26 years old and it's like, hey, you get to go be the defensive coordinator. I knew we had some talent. We were young, but we had some talent certainly, as if, generally does. And I saw large areas that we could change from that 2019 defense that I got to work with Coach Terper. And so, you get to make those adjustments and to learn by personal trial and error, not just being in the room and having the ability to have input, but at the end of the day, it's a coordinator's job to say yay or nay, or this is the way we're going to do it, or this is what we're specifically doing, and then how we're going to do it. My first 4 years, I learned 4 different ways of doing it, different ways of thinking it, and then had 3 years to do it myself. And fortunately, COVID was obviously not great for a lot of people and super interesting time, but I had the time to study what we did immensely in 2019 with Coach Terper to say, like, what do we need to get better at, and how do we need to get better, and what do I want to put in? And then try it all out in spring and extended spring in 2021 when the pandemic kind of came back to normalcy, and then go put it on display in the fall and then learn from that season as a first year coordinator into the second year. And, it's never been a part of good defenses, bad defenses. We go to Stony Brook and we weren't very good statistically, but there's a ton of learning. And Coach K's been doing it for 18, 17 years at St. Thomas and has done better than almost everybody as a defensive coordinator. So, there's a million ways to do it, and having the humility to realize is like, I don't know what he knows because I don't have his experiences, and he doesn't know what I know because he doesn't have my experiences. And I thought that's why Coach K and I worked well together last year, because he's a front guy. He played up front. I'm a back end guy, played on the back end. And we thought of defense from our perspective to start. And then obviously you can't neglect one or the other, but that's just the way that we got into the profession from our playing days. And then we're able to work together with those different perspectives.
Yeah, to me, that was one of the things I noticed being on the opposite side of the ball is I think you hit it with the humility while maintaining confidence. And I think that's the tightrope that I personally walk as well. But what I would notice, and really, when I would slip in on lunch in the game plan and kind of see how your brain was working, understanding, seeing what Coach K's strengths were in the front from practicing against you guys, I thought that was a really unique combination. And again, testament to Wally Kaczynski for understanding what his system was, but then allowing someone with your intellect and experience to add and apply to it. And I just know when we'd sit in a booth together, one of the things I really enjoyed was when the defense would be up, I'd hear you working through personnels and essentially calling out what the offense was about to do. And I just thought that was so intriguing because I had never been in the box before, and seeing you work like that, but you could see it. There was a problem solving methodology that you were working through and leading you to the suggestions you were making. But I do think that you demonstrate a humility of understanding the role, but you did a great job of providing impact in that role that you had, which I think obviously will serve you in the role that you have this year. As far as a defensive philosophy, hearing you talk about defense, we talked about this off air. I don't know if defensive coaches will think that this as much of a compliment as I'm going to give it to you, but I see you as a guy that thinks about defense in an offensive perspective, meaning you always, it feels like you want to dictate terms. I think that the way that, some of the things you talked to me about of how you would slow down a quarterback's processes were super intriguing, because everything that I want to try to accomplish, you were thinking of the same thing on the inverse. And I hadn't heard a lot of people that I'd been around that really were able to speak that. And this is how we actually did it. From a philosophical standpoint, what would you say your guys' general defensive philosophy is? And kind of what makes it unique?
I think that the way it's built has been a product of from offensive coaches. I mean, it's a yin and a yang. It's the same concept of like the coverage dictates the run fit and the run fit dictates the coverage and potential conflict and where support or where you don't have support or how you have support, who is the support specifically. So, COVID allowed us to pick the brains of offensive guys and figure out, like, I realized that I was a DC at young age in 4 different systems. And I was like, I know why we did certain things, but a lot of time to Zoom with people and to talk about, well, why is the O-line think of it this way? And how does what we're going to potentially do affect you? And if it doesn't, then that's, maybe it doesn't, but maybe it's a huge problem for you. And I don't know the problems, but I got to figure out the problems in terms of your rules. And so everything's built and then, called intentionally to confuse the offense. Like if we can confuse the offense, then we call it cloudy mind is slow feet. If you got a clear mind, you got fast feet. And that's the same thing on defense. Like we don't want to be playing with a cloudy mind. So how do we confuse the offense? Well, who's most important? It's the quarterback because he's the direct extension of the OC. And the OC is going to be able to provide, and he's probably the smartest on the field, right? But he's going to be able to provide adjustments and trying to confuse the quarterback. And then also because he's the ball handler, right? Like he has the ball in his hand every play. So if we can confuse him in a plethora of different ways and how we do that, then we're going to be pretty good on defense. What I, in the past neglected maybe was how to confuse the offensive line. Like that's just as important because even if the quarterback knows exactly what you're doing, but they're confused or they're making mistakes post-snap, that's a big problem obviously for the quarterback. So sometimes you don't have to confuse the quarterback. You got to get to the quarterback. And sometimes that's by confusing the offensive line, and whether that's movement or pressure or disguise and I think it's important philosophically. I took this approach on, in the last couple of years, is like, how do you confuse them on first and second down? Not just on third down when you know probably what protection you're going to get. It's like, how are you going to confuse them on a base down? And being more multiple to do that, I think is really important to, instead of being vanilla on first down to get them to those obvious situations, is let's try to dictate, like you said, let's try to dictate what we're going to get you into, not by like just hoping we play great base defense on first and second down and then we end up in a third and long. So that's kind of where it starts, is like, how can we confuse the offense? The other thing that I think is important, and I have heard analogies about this specifically, but it's like the offensive coordinator has a gun and he gets to shoot the bullets. And it's not that we're just holding, a rubber shield that it's going to ricochet back, if I block it or if I dodge it. Like I also got a gun as well. And it's a revolver and it's, it depends on when I pull the trigger. So I think of myself as a play caller from that perspective. I think there's an art of play calling. And so I have to dictate the terms, and whether that's with pressure or disguise or front manipulation or stemming, like that's my job as the DC to confuse the coordinator, the quarterback, the offensive line. So that's how everything starts. And then, how you build it from having that philosophy. I think it's an accumulation of all the things I've learned. It's a hybridization of all that I've learned. And I don't have I'm a big history guy. Like I like learning about different things from history. I watch, my girlfriend laughs, but I always want to put on, something related to history, whether it's about war, things in history. But the history of football, I don't have it all figured out. I don't know everything about the single wing or the veer. I don't have that figured out. But what I do know is like odd can be even and even can be odd, and both of them can be bare. And there's a million ways. It's simple to get to doing everything, in my opinion, and the way that we build it out. So it's like, how can you be multiple from a coverage perspective, but also have convictions about what you're doing? And so that's how I approach it, is like the guys know we're going to be multiple up front. We're going to be multiple with disguises. We're going to be multiple with pre and post snap coverage, rotation, or the lack thereof, middle field open, middle field closed. And our goal is to find tendencies and attack your tendencies. And our goal is to not have tendencies. And so I think as much about looking forward, and we'll get into this, but as much about looking at the opponent as much about who you are and the tendencies that you've created, because they're going to attack your tendencies. And so the less tendency that you can become, but also remain obviously a really good defense and not overload your players, then you're cooking with grease.
Yeah. And it's funny. And I think this is why there's such an attraction for me to listen to your brain, is a lot of the things that you said, my key breakthrough points in my knowledge base were understanding a defense perspective, right? And the way I like to think of it is the same way you do. What are the rules? How can we take a relatively simple concept, but trip up rules in the process? And that's when you first started explaining to me I thought you did a really good job one day. We were on the whiteboard of just, okay, in the RPO world, I think you were asking me, hey, if you saw this, what would you be attacking? And then you kind of played through the different tools that you use in this particular game to trip up the quarterback's process and really slow them down. And I think it was even you one time that said, yeah, it's an offensive coordinator versus a defensive coordinator, but what you're trying to attack is the quarterback, not the OC. The OC ain't out there, right? The quarterback's the one that's got to make this decision. And I've kept that with me. And that's what I really like about your mentality and your process is, and I wrote it down, the first and second down focus. I've never called defense in my life, but it's like my favorite calls of the day are open downs because this is what it is. And we're going to go get our 6 and 7 yards. And here it is. But dictating the terms on those downs, I think that's just a segue and an insight into how you see the game, where you want to keep the pressure on the offense the entire game. It's the same way that I think about offense, where if we are not the ones applying pressure, the pressure is going to be applied to us. And so I've always thought that was really intriguing about the way you thought. Something that we're going through at different places, but at the same time together. You had to implement a new system. First year, you get hired on, you get spring ball, you have a new place, new staff, new players, you're teaching this scheme. This is something I'm doing a deep dive on. I'm trying to understand myself and my situation. What were some of the key takeaways you had from this spring in a general standpoint, just being that coordinator in a new spot, implementing this new system?
I think the biggest key takeaway, and I had the conscientiousness to think about this beforehand, but it's still a big takeaway, is that it doesn't matter where you go. Like, it's very difficult to get into Colgate from an academic perspective. So the guys that we get to work with are extremely intelligent human beings. They can handle a lot cerebrally, but everything is new, right? And so you have to be a really, really good teacher to implement a new way of doing things. It's not just the new what. It's not like what we're doing. This is new. Boom. It's about how we're going to do it and how we're planning to execute it in conjunction with all the new terminology. And even then, there's just so many. The English language is vast, but football coaches steal and use ideas and then, piggyback off of them to create terminology. And next thing you know, you're using the same terminology in your system that maybe was used in a different system. That's a completely different concept. And so there's things that you can't predict that happen. But I think the key takeaways from the spring for us is, like, we got a new staff, guys that I haven't worked with, guys that have been here and haven't been here, players that obviously were here, and it's just all new to them, and there's going to be growing pains, and how we get through them is more important than, it's more about how we get through it together and how we learn from it and how we develop in the summer for the fall based on what we did in the spring. So I'm excited about that personally.
What's one of the things that you learned about yourself being in this coordinator chair again that you may have known but weren't as vivid to you before you went in and attacked this process? Is there anything you came away with in regards to what you learned about yourself as a coordinator, as a teacher, that you thought might be valuable?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time Division I coordinator, and with Division I comes more resources, so we have more coaches, right? So I'm working with more people, having to lead more people on the staff than I've ever had to. So that was new. I knew that. I was like, thinking, I was in the mix for this job and how many people we're going to have and how you can disperse work, but how communication is necessary as a leader and how that'll change from my previous time as a coordinator, where it was just 3 of us, including, myself, figuring it out and working together. The thing I learned specifically with the assistants and the players, but specifically the assistants because they're the first ones that we're teaching, is like, my leadership style is not a micromanaging style. Like, I want them to do what they enjoy doing and what they were hired to do. And that's to teach our guys what we're doing and why we're doing it. Ultimately they're the experts at their position, but they're not the experts within the system. And that's why I was hired. And so it's my job to micromanage them a little bit more than I want to make sure it gets done the way it needs to get done for the foundation to be set a certain way. If a step within the process is neglected or not done because they don't know how important it is, or for whatever reason, we'll have a faulty foundation in the future. And that's a lot harder to come back and make adjustments to, rather than just stepping out of my own comfort zone. And I figured that out early. Spring, I don't think was hard for me to do that, but it was definitely a realization where it was like, I'm going to have to do this. And we worked well. Fortunately, I work with a lot of guys that have a lot of humility and they're learning. Like, they want to learn as well. Guys with more experience than I have in terms of years and things like that, they wanted to learn, but also I said it right away, I'm an open book and I'm going to hear you out. And if I see it beneficial, then we'll implement it. And if not, then it's going to be my way. That's part of the process of being new with a new staff, with myself knowing the way it needs to be or how it can be and how it needs to get there, but they don't know that yet.
Yeah, I found that too, where you always think about teaching the players and that education piece. And as you said, teaching is always going to be king. But to me, that realization early in my transition, as you mentioned, of seeing the level of detail that needs to be applied with the staff. And you said it, it's not just what it is, but why are we doing it? And I try to pride myself on if I don't have a good why, it's probably not the best idea. If I'm spewing out that we do this just because this is what we've done before, that's usually a good way to get beat on Saturdays, right? So I found the same deal. Now you're a relatively young guy. This would be your fourth year coordinating. Is that correct? I always found it, especially early when I took over a coordinating role, I found that the thing that surprised me was difficulty leading other men. And like you said, you're leading guys that have more experience to you. And we kind of talked about this off air. How do you manage that part of it, being a young coach? And you kind of touched on it, but just, I would say most of the coaching is with the other coaches when you get into a coordinating role, especially in year one.
Choice Hotels get you more for your money so you can maximize any road trip. And as your vacation maximizationer, I'm going to make sure you hear the maximum sizzle of Comfort Inn's free hot breakfast. Let's get real close. Maximum apple. Now that's fresh crispimization. Maximum waffle. Hear that crunch. And that's maximum coffee. Oh yeah, that's the pour I'm talking about. Breakfast maximized before hitting the road. Check into more. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Like, has there been parts when you were at Ithaca, did you find that as challenging of like learning how to lead and direct a staff and still being a young guy yourself at the Division I? Do you ever run into that, within your own mind of just the level of challenge that it is to direct other grown men? That's how I always thought about it.
Initially, it's been a thought, but we do have a relatively young staff as well here at Colgate in its entirety, not just on defense. So a lot of the guys that we hired or that retained are either younger or around my age. And then there's one that's older, Coach Eisen, that's been doing it, about twice as long as I have. And so, to his credit and to, I think everybody in this profession has some level of humility. Like I mentioned before, it's like, you don't know what you don't know, and everybody knows that. And some people keep it more on their forefront of their thought process, and they're more willing to learn, and they're more apt to keeping a sponge-like mentality. And some aren't. But from his perspective, I don't want to speak for him, but like he's a part of the previous staff that's now on the new staff, and he just wants us to be great, just like we all want to be great. And so, the collaboration amongst us as a whole staff is like, this is the system, this is how we're going to do it. This is my vision. I don't think from me or a head coach or any organization without a vision, a strong, well thought out vision. And that's my job, is to say, like, this is what we're going to be. This is how we're going to do it. This is my thoughts around it. These are the strengths and the weaknesses and the whys and the hows that I see it happening and playing out. If there's a better way to do it within the structure of what we're trying to do, I want to know. And that, I think, our players, I took this early on, when I was a young coordinator. I said, look, guys, I don't have it all figured out. What I do know is we're going to do these things. And, the pillars of defense, of playing great defense, and how we're going to get there, we'll figure it out together. And that ownership, I think, from the players, when you ask them what they're seeing and how they're processing and what they think about an opponent, whether it's their personnel, whether it's what they do and how they do it, like, if you're not inquisitive as a coach to your players or vice versa to your other coaches, then you get less buy-in from them. So I think initially, in terms of like the hierarchy and dealing with people in this profession, I've always just been as open and try to be a good teammate. Like, if I'm a good teammate, then I think they're going to feel like they can be themselves and we can work well together. As soon as my ego gets too big or somebody else's ego gets too big, whether it's because they think they know more, they have more experience, they don't like you personally, like, there's a million things that can get in the way. You start to have problems with how you see the game together and collectively as a staff. And fortunately, we don't have that here. And it's been really seamless transition with the guys that were here and the new guys.
That's well said. I think, you mentioned earlier in the talk of having the humility. I know you have conviction and passion into what you do, which is an element of what makes you great. One thing that you hit on that I found was probably the saving grace for our implementation here in the first year is what the vision is, and almost a daily, whether it's a reminder, just outline that this is what we are going to do. And I think that's the key for me that I found is obviously what you're doing is important. And I think that you're going to scheme things at a really high level, but how, what is that thing how we're going to get it done? That overall idea, that's what I leaned on is when this nuance wasn't right or this detail wasn't right. It was, are we applying what we're doing to the greater vision? And then I saw this firsthand at St. Thomas with, I wrote it down, being inquisitive with your players. I saw this firsthand with the safeties that you coached and how engaged they were, the level of meetings that you would do when we'd be on the road, the way that you conducted the meetings. I think we're in St. Louis last year when I got to kind of see this is how he does his Friday night meeting. And it was very conversational. And I think that that's one of the strengths that you have is you obviously know football, you can talk football, but applying it, that's what true teaching is. And having that, building that relationship, gaining the trust. I saw it firsthand. I think that's a sign of a really high level coach, especially when you have a scheme that is good. I think that I got to witness that firsthand last year. Now, this is something I think about all the time. Now that spring's done, you have this foundational piece and your key concepts outlined and installed, and you got all this film. What's your process now for enhancement of what you've installed? You got, I look at our stuff of this is a insight into what we're going to be. And now what I think about is how do we take the outline that's been established and make it something that is, applicable on Saturdays. That's essentially, for our perspective, going to score and win games. What's kind of that process for you as you go through the rest of this summer piece around recruiting and whatnot?
I think as you look at what we did in the spring, just first and foremost, you get hired and it's like, okay, let me get my eyes on as much Patriot League film as possible because the system is the system. I firmly believe that you have to have a large toolbox within your systems, a lot to pull from on a week-to-week basis. You can only do that if you're a great teacher. And you can get the guys, like you said, the transfer of teaching. If they can't apply the teaching on and execute it, like it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're not going to be very good on Saturdays. And so it started with what do we need to do and who do we need to become schematically to defend what the Patriot League, is going to run. It's Jimmy's and Joe's at the end of the day, but there's a flair within each conference. The Big 12 is a lot different than the SEC 10 years ago. Modern football is a little different in general as it continues to evolve. Some people play with fullbacks and some people don't. And some people play under center and some people don't. Some people run certain pass concepts that some people don't. And so my thought process coming out of spring was like, what's wrong with what we did? Why is it wrong? What can be corrected within that concept or that specific thing that we weren't doing well? And whether it's we weren't running it well, executing it well, or whether there needs to be an adjustment in place from my perspective, how the call is structured and concept is structured. What can't be corrected right now? And maybe that's a personnel issue. And to piggyback off that, what are our guys capable of? So as I looked, I try to keep those things in mind amongst other things as I'm watching it through the summer and say, what can our guys do? What do they do really well? What don't they do well, but can still be used as change-ups? What don't they do well that we can correct, that we can teach, that's just maybe going to take reps to get better at? They have the capability of doing it, but maybe they haven't done it. Maybe it's new to them from the spring. They never did it in the past. A perfect example is, somebody being under center for a quarterback that hasn't taken under center snaps his whole life because modern football is a lot out of the gun. If you walked in and you were like, well, this is what we're going to do, it's like, this is just not going to be comfortable. His footwork, his confidence associated with it is not going to be at the highest it can be because he hasn't put the work in. The work is correlated to the confidence and your preparation. And so that's part of the summer process is to get our guys to continue to get confident within the scheme and what we're asking them to do. You can provide good examples from other places you've done it or showing them doing it well or somebody else in spring or just teaching them how it can be done better and talking them through that so that they have the confidence in you as a coach to be like, coach knows what he's talking about to help me get where I need to get to play that technique or that call or concept at the highest level that I can possibly play it. So a lot of inward reflection and a lot of questioning. And then you got to make decisions about what you want to change or what you don't want to change and how to change it specifically. And a lot of that I think comes from the assistants like me. That's where I'm like, what do you think about this technique up front? Like how can we play this a little better? Like whether it's our footwork, whether it's our hands, whether it's our eye progression, whether it's just the mindset of the player, like those are all things that I defer to the assistant coaches and then try to make the final decision on.
Another thing that I think we have a lot in common that you hear preached in the coaching world, but I don't think it's applied everywhere is obviously the system's a system. You have the conviction, you have the vision. All right, these are the schemes that we're going to run. But I love what you said about, okay, now that we're in the summer, that there at some point, right, the roster is set. And obviously the rosters are ever moving, but at some point they're set. And now how can we get the people that we have to be successful in year one within this system? And I think that that's a piece that is artistic, right? It's not scientific. And I think that, again, you teaching and carrying a big toolbox is going to allow you to apply that to them. But I also think that, that's where creativity, in my opinion, comes in, where you really have to fit the puzzle pieces to the greater puzzle. And then it all ties back to what do we need to win based on the opponents we play, which I think obviously is fantastic. One more question on that. In this phase of it, you're studying opponents. You're obviously doing a lot of internal reflection from a scheme, from a teaching, from a personnel standpoint. How much, I know you've done some really interesting studies on other teams' defenses over the years. How much are you using, and even if it's for one particular technique or scheme or problem you have, how much are you using outside film in this part of the season to maybe reassure you of something or give you a new idea or new direction? Are you doing that in this part of the offseason as an additional enhancement piece for what you're trying to get done this fall?
Before my last 2 years, where I was able to step back and be an assistant and work with other coordinators, other ways of doing things. When I was a coordinator at Ithaca, we did an inward reflection, but I felt, because I was at a place for more than 1 year, previously until I got to Ithaca, it was bouncing and learning from other people. So I still clinicked with people and would talk with people about football, but I really wanted to spend a lot of time yearly in the winter and in the summer watching other defenses. And I think there's a ton of merit to that, not just like they did something that maybe we can implement, but if they have to defend something offensively that we haven't seen, my goal is to have the problem solved before the problem arises, and the offense can line up in a numerous amount of things, formations, split variations that can play with our rules, or they set, what they do, and they get to call the plays first, and then we got to defend them. And so there's times that I remember over at my time at Ithaca where I would see something that I was just like, oh man, that's difficult if I have this call on or that call on. And it really started to get me to think about problem solving relative to problems I was maybe unaware of. And so I think that's super important. I think now that I've been at other places and I'm building this defense with the staff here as a second round of being a coordinator, I feel like a good foundation of knowledge of different ways of playing defense, that I'm shifting my focus a little bit more towards maybe 50-50 of more inward reflection, especially being in the first year with our guys, with these guys. We don't live in the transfer portal. These are our guys, and we're going to go to battle with them. And so I'm really curious about how we can get better here within the things within our control rather than what plays we can implement. But I think there's a ton of merit to continuing to look at other people and finding the problems that we can help solve before they arise in the future. Because there's always somebody doing something different, maybe more stressful to the defense or new that somebody didn't think of. And then it goes viral and every offense wants to run it. And then we know how to defend it. And then you guys go away from it and you figure something else out. And we got to solve that problem when it arises. So just trying to be ahead of the curve is really big. And I think you can do that through talking with other people about football, about what they do, how they do it, what their rules are, and whether it's offensively or defensively minded coaches, but also looking at other people's film, access to film and access on social media and things like that. Like if you're not accessing it, you're just not growing, I think, to your potential. So I would say probably a little bit more towards 50-50. We need more inward reflection about who we are and who we're going to be rather than who we could become because of somebody else.
Right. Yeah, especially in year one, right? Because it's not even defined yet what you are in a sense of having game reps and whatnot. So, I think that makes a lot of sense. But I love that there's a mentality of being ahead of the curve, which I think is really the foundation of this whole, this subsection of the podcast of love the evolutions of football. It seems like trends, they come and they go and then they circle back around and they take on they look different, but it's the same piece. And the guys that really capture my attention are the ones that are always forward thinking. And I had a thought the other day that being innovative in a vanity sense is always going to get exposed, right? The innovation to me is what you said. It's problem solving. That's the same way that I think of innovation on offense is how do we solve these problems before they present themselves on Saturday? So then again, at the end of the day, we're teaching it to our players so then they can execute the football play at the best of their ability, which is, again, I think a lot of what attracted me to your football brain when we got to work together is I could see that thought process. I could see you talked about some of the off-season studies you did. And really what you're doing is you're building this catalog of information that you can then utilize. This is and again, this is probably hard to do at this point, But if you could boil it down in an off season, what percent of your system do you think that you adjust or change and really adds an outside idea into it on a year-to-year basis? I think this question will be really interesting next year for you. But you've been a coordinator before and you had those position coaching years to build up to this. When you look at it, is there a number or an idea that comes to mind of like how much are you going to apply to the system that wasn't there presently before you walked in? I don't know if you have a thought on that right now, but I'm just always curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, and see how we execute it this fall versus, the Patriot League, our non-conference opponents, and just see, we'll obviously adapt and improvise and make adjustments as we need to. But, I think anybody can be convicted about anything if you've seen it play out. But being naive to that conviction being the only or the best way in the future is, I think, stupid. It might have worked. It might have worked for you at that moment. It might work for other people in the moment, but it might not work for you in that moment. And so am I willing to change things week to week? Yeah. Am I willing to change things, in the off season? Yeah. What percentage that is hard, just being in the first year with a new system. I've learned so much from other people throughout my time working with other people that this system is not a copy and paste from anybody. Not even it's not a copy and paste from my time as a coordinator, because I've learned and forced myself to continue to learn about what did we do even then was maybe not good then. But if I didn't inwardly reflect about what it was, not how good it was, but what it was, then I don't know that it might still be a benefit in the future. So I think that inward reflection is really important to make those adjustments. I would like to say hopefully above 80%, you're not making adjustments to major adjustments or cutting out, 10, 15% of it's this is just not good, But I think if you're not creative enough, then you remain risk adverse. And obviously you have to find that fine line of what's too much and what's not for your players, but what's too much for yourself. And if you can just line up and beat somebody with the same call, and you're going to win, then why make it even harder on yourself and players and everybody else? But that's not the case. It's very difficult to do that, I'll say. I think you have to be creative. You got to try stuff out and you got to be willing to make adjustments and have the humility to say it didn't work. Hopefully it doesn't beat you. You don't lose the game because of those decisions, but that's the ability to make those decisions in the moment when they're not expecting it, to shoot the bullet at the right time when they don't see it coming. And sometimes you shoot at the wrong time and it ends up being detrimental to the defense. You got to remain risky. Otherwise you're always living in fear. And
I love it.
I just don't think that's the best way to do it. Not just for defense, I think holistically.
I agree. And that's what I love about you is that there is a creativity, man. It can stem and spawn from so many different directions. But I love that of remaining, having, an enthusiasm for being risky and trying things. But then it all comes back to what you said, humility of being able to inwardly reflect and understand, did it work? Did it not work? And then the whole cycle kind of repeats itself. Why and how are we going to fix it and whatnot? But I think those are the guys that just really draw my attention, are the ones that are willing to risk creativity. And again, your stuff is going to be sound. It's going to be tight from the box all the way to the back end. But I do, just talking with you and working with you for a year, I love the mentality that you carry over. I'm going to hit you with just a couple quick hitters outside of the system stuff. Something else that I really respect about you is I think you do a good job on a personal level of maintaining an edge. And what I mean by that is, you're a guy that is constantly working out, and following and being with you and then following you on social media is, I think you're well-read, you're well-versed. Like you said, you study history, you study philosophers, you do a lot of things outside of the realm of football that keeps your mentality moving forward, keeps you on the attack. Can you just speak to that on, obviously it helps you as a coach, but on a human level, how you maintain that inquisitive, but also convicted and aggressive edge that, to me as a person, that's some of the strengths that you have. Because I love reading the stuff that you put up just because usually it motivates me. You're reading a philosopher and it's like, man, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't have life figured out by any means, but what I've found is that when I work out, if I just work out consistently, the way that makes me feel will be in the forefront of my mind. And I have I guess you could call it an addictive personality. And so when I do something that is positive, I want to do more of it. So, for me, my biggest challenge is continuing to be consistent with things like you're saying, in terms of studying other people or thinking about, and life, different times of the year, you got different time to do it. But I just remember being, like I mentioned before, my first year where I just realized it was an eye-opening experience. It's like, man, you don't have it figured out. So what makes you think that just because I'm now at this age, at this position at Colgate, that I got it figured out? Like I have my convictions about what I like about scheme, or I like about what we do and how we do it, but everything's constantly under evaluation, personally and holistically as a defense. I think as soon as you change that, I think failure is honestly the best influence. Like if you're not willing to fail, if you're not willing to try new things, to troubleshoot the problems and think through what potentially could occur, and then adapt and erase what maybe wasn't worth, but adapt because it was a good thought initially, it just needed to be rep and made mistakes. I think if you don't have that risk with growing, but remaining convicted about certain things, I think you'll never reach your potential. Like I said, I don't have it figured out. And there's so many other people that are smarter than me that have written other things, that have done other things, that just reading about that or hearing about it or studying it becomes motivating to me as well. I think that's contagious. And I think that, to your point, it's like social media connects us. But if you got a lot of guys that are like-minded from that perspective, man, I mean, you're a product of the 5 guys that you're around the most, and high-achieving people like being around high-achieving people. And if you personally want that for yourself, and you're not going to have it every day, but if you continuously are doing that, the people that are close to you are going to do that as well, and then motivate you to do more. And so it's this, snowball going down the hill. It picks up momentum. You just got to steer it in the right direction sometimes.
Yeah, man. Well said. Again, that's a lot of that. I mean, is why I have so much respect for you, both as a football coach, but just as a man, like you said, on a journey of life. Life is ever changing and insane in its own beautiful ways, right? But watching just kind of how you navigate and through trials and tribulations, and learning and finding the ways that you're going to continuously stay on the attack. That's the ultimate respect that I can give someone, is just watching you, how you go about it. Definitely motivates me. I got to do it in person, but even being in completely different places this year. But I certainly enjoyed being able to cross paths in person and see it with my own eyes. Again, first defensive guy that we got on this, and it's a testament to you and the way that you're constantly chasing being the best version of yourself. And that all applies to football and life. But I really appreciate you coming on here. Have a high amount of respect for you, and definitely going to be following along. And again, this podcast is all about this idea of truly being genuinely curious and remaining a student of the game on a day-to-day basis, understanding that we don't have it all figured out. And you're a great testament to that and a perfect reflection. So I really appreciate you coming on. I hope you freaking lock people down and hold them on under 10, whatever it is that the defensive stats are. But thank you so much for coming on here and speaking with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a lot of fun to reconnect and to talk a little bit about these things. And obviously, like I've said multiple times, I don't have it all figured out. So I'm an open book and willing to share and to help along the way with people that want, help and want to reach out. So I encourage anybody that hears that to reach out and to be willing enough to reach out, and I'm willing to share. So thanks again, and I appreciate your time.
Amen.
Thank you again for listening to the Coach and Coordinator podcast. As you've noticed, we now have a series of podcasts on the Coach and Coordinator Network. We're really excited about this series approach and what each different host brings to us. Plus, we have some roundtables, which essentially are hostless podcasts, starting with Think Tank. We recorded that first Think Tank with Dan Gonzalez, Dub Maddox, and Josh Herring, and I'll tell you, it was so detailed and so good in what they put into it. I know you're going to enjoy that series as well as all the other series we have on the Coaching Coordinator Network. Be sure to follow all of our sponsors currently that Signature Championship rings, Modern Football Technology, and Titan GPS. Check out our 10% toolkit, where we highlight all of our partners and what they have available to you, as well as some special offers. The link to that is in the show notes. Check out our enhanced show notes at coachandcoordinator.com. We'll be adding content that works better on video or as a download. And follow us on X at Coach K. Grabowski.